That having been said, I want to start this program off talking about truth. Those of you who've listened to me for a long time know that I've always had this sort of obsession, this love-hate relationship with this concept, and using air quotes with my fingers, of the truth. When I was a kid, one of the earliest times I remember being frustrated by this whole question of the truth involved my search for King Arthur. And my mom was doing a film in Britain when I was 4 or 5, 6 years old, whatever I was. And I became obsessed with the romantic myth of King Arthur and began trying to figure out if this was true. I wanted it to be true. And I was in Britain, so there was, research available. Long story short, when someone seeks truth in a myth, they are destined to be disappointed. My connection to truth has been full of disappointments. I remember when I was 17 or 18, first becoming really politically aware and involved, I wrote an article and I sent it off to some newspapers around where I lived in Los Angeles, and it was entitled, "The Death of Objective Truth." And the whole concept here, it's a very 17-year-old or 18-year-old kid sort of concept, is that there used to be truth, and truth has gone away, and the Gordian knot that is preventing us from fixing the problems we face is that, truth isn't here, right? I always love that quote from the Bible, "And the truth shall set ye free." Or John Lennon's line, "Just give me some truth," and you think that this is going to be a panacea. And I wrote this article, and you send it out, and no one picks up on it, and you think, well, what's the problem? It occurs to me now that there might have been quite a few snickers among the people who read that article and who were older than I was and who had come to a place in their life where they figured out the way of the world when it comes to truth. Truth is an extremely rare commodity. Even when you think you have truth, you probably don't. In my article, I had said that, the real problem is we can't ever get past the arguing over whose facts are correct when you have a political discussion, right? Democrats and Republicans in the late 1980s are having a discussion over policy. The whole thing was just evolving into a question of, the other guy's facts or the other gal's facts. One person would be using the facts in the New York Times, which would be different from the facts in the New York Post. And, you never got to the discussion on the political issue. You were too busy arguing over whether you could trust the Post's facts or whether you could trust the Times facts. So, in my younger days, I considered the fight to be over a question of truth. Get the message out, show people the way things really are, and the solutions will follow. Many of you are critical, by the way, but many of you have heard me say that we have way too much secrecy in the United States government right now. Way too much. I would cut the stuff down to 90% of what it is now, just go down to the bare 10% that's really required. And the whole thinking behind that is if people could see what was going on, they would have a more realistic version of the world around them, which would cause them to, alter their opinions to more closely match the reality of the situation, right? And keeping secrets from the American people and the rest of the world prevents us from seeing the world as it really is. So we get to live in our fantasy world and not know the way it really is. Now, let me just take an aside for a minute and talk about something Tony Bennett, yes, the 85-year-old singer Tony Bennett, said the other day. When I emerged from the hardcore history edit room cave, I have all these stories that have been piling up since the last show, and I kind of look at them and I don't even know they just look like this strange pile of specific stuff I couldn't possibly get granular with right now. But there was this Tony Bennett story among a couple of them. And for those of you who aren't familiar what happened the other day with Tony Bennett during an interview on the Howard Stern show, but they started talking a little about the 9/11 terror attacks. Now, it makes sense since it was like the anniversary of 9/11. And Tony Bennett took the line that a lot of other people, both from the right and the left and all over the political map and all over the world, have said, which is essentially that attack did not just arrive out of the blue. Let me read you a little of the ABC News story I have on this, but, it was everywhere. From the middle of the piece, quote, Howard Stern then asked Bennett about how the United States should deal with terrorists, specifically those responsible for the 2001 attack on the World Trade Center. But who are the terrorists? Are we the terrorists or are they the terrorists? Two wrongs don't make a right, Bennett said. In a soft-spoken voice, the singer disagreed with Stern's premise, the story says, that the 9/11 terrorist actions led to U.S. military involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. Quote, "They flew the plane in, but we caused it," Bennett responded, "because we were bombing them and they told us to stop." End quote. Now, Bennett was a combat vet in the Second World War. He wasn't like some rear echelon guy. He was on the front lines. And he said in the Stern interview that the first time he saw a dead German, he became a pacifist. But he also said that a lot of the guys he was with didn't want to kill anybody. And that part of the problem is the weaponry is just so powerful that it's kind of like, I'm putting words into his mouth now, but kind of like a meat grinder, and anybody who gets caught in the way just gets ground up. You couldn't try to protect people sometimes if you wanted to once the, fighting was really going. Now, Bennett had to apologize a couple days after the Stern appearance, maybe the day afterwards. He had to apologize because some people obviously took what he said to somehow imply that what happened on 9/11 was deserved. In other words, if you point out cause and effect, that's the same as pointing out blame. But it's not. First of all, the number of people that have openly, said what's obvious, and that is that 9/11 doesn't happen if we're not in the Middle East. If there's no oil in the Middle East, if there's no Israel to worry about, if the Middle East is like, the Central African nations right now in our consciousness, nobody attacks us on 9/11 because they hardly have any contact with us at all. We're over there. There's your cause for the effect that happened. Now, does this legitimize the effect that happened? Heck no. Killing civilians is not legitimate, whether they're American civilians, Jewish civilians, or Islamic civilians. We've somehow forgotten this, by the way. We can kill children now all the time, and no one ever says, we're killing children. I mean, it's just implied that this is somehow okay. Doesn't matter if the children are American, Middle Eastern, European, African. Where have our values gone, right? So no one is saying that those 3,000 people deserve to die. No one is calling that anything but what it is, a crime against humanity. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. And if you can't see the cause and effect, how can you get any closer to truth? I mean, imagine that President Bush, after 9/11, had stood up in one of his public comments, and instead of saying what he said, which, judging from the comments below the ABC News story, tons of people still believe, which is that the terrorists attacked us out of the blue because, as he said, they hate our freedom. Instead, what if he'd gotten up there and say, look, this is the natural reaction. We kind of expected some sort of an attack for a while. We realized that, you can't go in and be a geopolitical player in that region without stepping on toes. And that eventually, these are serious people. If you step on their toes long enough, they're going to try to find a way to step on yours. That's human nature. There's nothing controversial about that. There's nothing that says, oh, God, okay, well, those 3,000 people, I guess, deserve to die. I wish it had been, maybe if it had been 40,000, they deserve to die. None of them deserve to die. Stuff happens. But we don't make their deaths any more worthy by pretending like, the stuff that happened had nothing to do with the attack. It's like saying that the Marine barracks victims who got killed in the suicide attack back in the early 80s in Lebanon, the Marines, when the Marine barracks was blown up and French soldiers died too. It's like saying that, well, it was just random and out of the blue. No, it wasn't. They were in Lebanon. What are they doing there? So these kinds of things happen, but if we can't even talk about the reality of the situation, you're not going to get any nearer to truth at all. So this is the kind of thing that drives Dan Carlin crazy, were he here instead of in the editing booth. Here's the thing, though. I think that my premise has always been somewhat flawed. I think this idea I have that if we could just get to the truth, results would start to follow, that this is a Gordian knot blocking reform and everything else. If we could just get on the same page, we could move forward. I don't think so anymore.